Welcome to Breaking the Standard, where we are closing the communication and knowledge gap for small businesses in GovCon. I'm Aubrey Gainfort, and today we have very special guest Constance Jackson with us today. Constance, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And if you could just introduce yourself for our listeners, that would be great.
Absolutely. Constance Jackson, I am currently an acquisition SME. I support a very large government agency doing all things acquisition. And this is sort of the pre-award before the government releases an RFP. There's a ton of documentation that has to pass through the contracting officer and legal, and I'm responsible for drafting that documentation. I am a former contracts manager and a proposal manager, and I entered the lovely world of government contracts way back in 1998.
So basically, what Constance isn't saying is that she does the Lord's work, and I wish that we could have her a version of her everywhere because not every agency gets to have a position or a support like that. So if you have that in your agency, please take advantage of it. But today, Constance is here. We're going to be discussing something that we were talking about earlier that we've both wanted to talk about, and I feel like it's like the unspoken side of government business, and it's actually, what does the government do right? And so Constance, countless times we see, we hear, we read, or we personally experience how the government is messing up. They either did something wrong or they did a disservice to businesses. They're not perfect, right? And I will admit that myself. We're not perfect. The government is not perfect. I am not the government. Let me just clarify that. But, what do we not see behind the scenes, that the government does do right? So, what are some of the things that, people aren't seeing that the government's doing like on a regular basis?
The government, especially for small businesses and large businesses in most instances, know how to handle these things. But a lot of small businesses get into government contracts and they have no idea what the rules, regulations, policies are.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how to invoice. That's
Mm-hmm.
one of the most important things. Their instructions, and they seem fairly easy, but if you leave anything out, your invoice will be rejected, and it is
Mm-hmm.
not going to get paid until you have followed every direction listed in the instructions. When
Mm-hmm.
those things happen, of course, the small businesses panic. They reach out to the contracting officer, they reach out to the contract specialist, and the government will hold their hand through that entire process to ensure that they get paid on time so they can pay their people. That is a big deal. And I personally know that a lot of time is spent managing invoicing. If they are sent a letter that they don't understand from the contracting officer, they reach out, the contracting officer explains, and a lot of times they are doing administration and management of small businesses contracts. There's no obligation for them to do that, and they do it.
Yeah, it's interesting that, we talk about this because it's something that I never thought about until you and I talked about this the other day, that, there are things that have to be done, and, we do them as contracting personnel because we want the small businesses to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to stand there and completely list out everything we've done for you, but if we don't go through the process to make sure that you're a viable company and that you are in good standing, and if you're an 8A, we're doing an 8A direct award, and we go through all the paperwork, none of that was done, then you wouldn't get the award. Number one. Number two, if you're brand new, we don't want you to fail. So we want to make sure that you're going to succeed. So that's why we sit down and go through understanding your contract, especially if you've never worked on a federal contract, depending on the agency before. And then the invoicing thing, I'm so glad you brought that up because, a lot of times I personally recommend that they send a draft. And this has been really helpful because in your contract, it actually lists out all of the instructions on how you're supposed to submit it. A lot of times people don't read it, or they forget, or they miss something. It's so crucial that you have all of the important information in there, because if you don't have one thing, like you said, they reject it. It goes all the way back to the company. As a CO in my agency, you don't get to see the invoice until it's already gone through the system, been approved, and the contracting officer representative has signed off on it to say, this is accurate. They did perform these services, and you're good to proceed to approve it for payment. I think it takes like 3 to 5 days on average once the invoice gets approved for a small business to get paid. And depending on how long it took you to submit your invoice, and then if it got rejected, that could be like a month or longer that you don't get paid. And it might not sound like a long time, but if you're a small business that doesn't have a lot of incoming income, or you have to pay your employees, or you need to, pay like a lender or someone that helped finance your company, that starts to get you into a really sticky territory. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's one of the things that I don't think people talk about. And I guess, why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that people don't talk about that?
I don't know. It's such a big deal, and I've seen it on both sides. Working as a contracts manager, and also, on this side, because I do support the cores sometimes with reviewing invoices and that sort of thing. So I don't know, but I have posted about this no less than 5 times on LinkedIn and on Instagram because it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm,
Small businesses cannot afford to go 30, 60, and this thing is not going to be resolved until it actually is resolved. You
mm-hmm,
can't afford to go 30, 60, 90 days without getting payment.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
I tell as many small businesses as I can, and that kind of goes back to you and I having a discussion about learning as much as you can before entering this business, so you don't have those types of mishaps.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm nodding emphatically because I know
Yeah.
people can't see me because this is an audio recording, but if you do more of the legwork up front, you're not going to know everything, but if you do more of the legwork to be able to look into what you're getting into, because federal contracting is a very different beast than state and local, and it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So if you're an impatient person, you are not going to want to get into government contracting. It's not a like, okay, I bid on this and I won kind of thing. And small businesses, it's a really interesting opportunity for them, because you have such an interesting perspective to be able to learn and grow and then become a bigger company if you want to. But if you don't take all of the steps necessary, including doing the things that you need to do to get paid, or be compliant on your contract, ooh, that's what I want to talk to you about. Then they're gonna be kind of like, uh up the creek without a paddle, I guess. So
Yeah.
compliance checks, we talked about this the other day for a couple of minutes. So what have you seen in terms of how the government helps behind the scenes with compliance checks for small businesses?
This is something else that doesn't get talked about enough. And I personally, while working as a contracts manager for a company, had this happen. So GSA schedules.
Mm-hmm,
If you don't meet the requirements of the $25,000 within the first 24 months, and each, with sales in each year thereafter, the government has the right to cancel your schedule.
mm-hmm,
Any times they do not. Now, I did have a schedule canceled, and we were in the process of trying to win contract awards. We just didn't. And that, what businesses don't realize is when there's a contracting officer that is managing the schedules, even if you're not winning and there's no activity, they still have to do administration for those contracts. So that's still work that they have to do.
mm-hmm,
So, of course, removing someone who is not active and who's not winning will lighten their load. And many, many times they will give you chance after chance to try to win some work before they cancel your schedule. So that's a big thing. And I think companies are paying other companies to help them get on a schedule. And I'm not sure if that part of it is being discussed, because I think, people are under the impression that I get on a schedule and I'm going to win work immediately.
mm-hmm,
As soon as
mm-hmm.
that schedule is awarded to me, I'm going to win work. And that's just not how it works. You have now you're in a smaller pool of people that you have to compete against, but you still have to go out and market, and you still have to compete.
What what do you think the impact is of this not being talked about, like what the government, like how the government helps and what they do right. Like, what do you think this lack of awareness does in terms of like impact to the like the contracting community? Like, I'm just curious.
I I like to say this often, entering with eyes wide open, not knowing the good things that the government does, the helpful things that the government does, especially with small business, you are entering with eyes closed. Your eyes are
Mm-hmm.
wide open because you don't know what's going on. And, as we discussed, it's not a perfect system. It isn't. But there are things that the government does that they absolutely should get credit for. And all
Mm-hmm.
of the hand holding and managing contracts that they do for small businesses, they absolutely deserve credit for that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see. I mean, I've been in government for 15 years, and even like the transition from the time I started to now with like the interaction with industry and how much more that's happening and being able to, like let them know about things, get their buy-in on things, share and try to be as transparent as possible. I think this is something also that has progressed because I can guarantee that some of the hand holding that I see today did not happen 10 to 15 years ago. But I think that there's been a shift in, we want small businesses to succeed. We don't want to be the bad guy. We don't want to be the, big brother to say, hey, you're not doing what you need to do. Well, maybe they don't understand. And I think that's what we've learned. And so when you say hand holding, I think one of the things that people might say, well, what does that look like? Some small businesses win a contract, but they don't necessarily understand everything that goes into that. So, like, you win the contract, but then what? Like, kickoff happens, and you have to look at how am I actually going to be able to manage this and be able to deliver for my customer. And so, if you're just starting, it's a very overwhelming experience because you might be like, okay, I knew I had a great proposal, and then now how am I going to actually like deliver on this? So, I have seen, COs do sit down with them to say, okay, well, who's going to be managing this? And, how are you doing this? And this is what we need from you. And you need to make sure to communicate with these three people on the government staff. And like that way they have an idea of it. So they're not automatically set up to fail. And, I feel like sometimes it's just a given. Like my personality, I don't want people to fail. If I can help you as much as humanly possible within like my capability, I will. But I think there are people that are like, you didn't meet what you needed to, you're out. And it's like that very like cut and dry thing. And so I really hope people understand that, like we are human. Like if you don't know something, ask. Like ask the questions. And I feel like it might also shift some of the perspective of contracting because contracting, we have to follow regulation, but we want people to succeed,
Yeah.
and I mean, I'm just so glad. Like when you mentioned this to me, I was like kind of taken aback when we talked about this because I was like, it was kind of a given that, we know that this isn't spoken about, but it was like, well, why? Like, why not? Like, why aren't people talking about this? So, I am curious, since you've been in like so many different spaces within the government contracting community, what advice would you give to small businesses that are currently in government contracting or want to get into government contracting?
Ask questions, invest in your business. And when I say invest, if there's something you don't know, you need to get either someone that you can talk to part-time or on a bartering basis that understands the rules and regulations surrounding government contracts. And there are too many rules and regulations that, I still learn things. I've been around all this time and I still, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And the rules and the laws change. So someone who can, keep up with what's going on. There was just a change recently, uh, yesterday or the day before, regarding how sole source awards can
Mm-hmm.
move forward and what the justification is. Do people know that? Or do you have somebody that's keeping track of those things?
Mm-hmm.
Anything that impacts you, you need to know about. So I would say, either on your own, trying to learn as much as you can about how things work and always ask questions. I haven't seen many situations where a CO or a CS was unwilling to answer a question that a
Mm.
contractor had, and you would be in a much better situation by answering or asking a question than you would by assuming what was meant and doing something wrong that, you know, your contract is out of compliance or something of that nature. So ask as many questions as you can.
In your experience, how often have you seen that not asking the question or missing something like in the regulation or their contract was the reason for a small business's downfall?
Well, I will say a couple of examples that I have. So one was a downfall because this business was an 8A business and the work that they received was 8A,
Mm-hmm.
all 8A contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as they started to graduate, they didn't win any more work.
Mm-hmm.
They also didn't work. One of the things I tell 8A businesses is there's no guarantee, even though that contract will 9 times out of 10 stay 8A, unless something major or significant changes the funding, a different department, the scope of work, something of that nature, it will stay 8A. But there's no guarantee that you will win that contract again when it comes up for recompete, because sometimes the government wants to give another 8A a chance. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what happened in one instance. Well, as an 8A, you need to work with other companies that provide the same support that you do. Maybe they can win that contract next and they can sub some of the work out to you. You need to always be thinking forward. It's not going to last forever. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most contracts are 5 years, but some of them aren't 5 years. And there's no guarantees in this at all. So you need to be thinking forward and, again, not looking at companies who do the same thing you do as competition all the time. Sometimes they can wind up being a mentor to you. You can wind up subcontracting to them. So
Mm-hmm.
that is definitely one thing that I would say. Oh, and
That's
another thing I was going to say is I had a company who did not read their contract, and there was work that needed to happen in a hazardous area overseas, and they had to pay for that insurance, and they had not put that in their pricing because they didn't read the proposal. Well, the person
mm,
have to go overseas and they had to pay that hazard insurance out of pocket because they had already signed the contract.
mm, 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 mm.
So not out of business, but that's a tough
Mm-hmm.
pill to swallow in terms of money that you hadn't allotted to
Right.
pay for. You know, this is something the government would have paid you for had you included in your pricing.
It's so silly to think that people don't read, but read. Like if you read, you would notice, oh, I have to account for that. Okay, we need to identify that this is the part of our pricing that would be for insurance.
Yes.
And then that would be literally very self-explanatory. And I'm so glad you mentioned about the 8A program because 8As, if you're an 8A and you get work in the 8A program, 9 times out of 10, it's going to stay in the 8A program. It's very hard to get it out. I've never seen it happen personally. And if you're used to just having things directly awarded to you, you need to get into the practice of looking at what it's like to compete for something, what it's like to sub with someone, what it's like to get out there. So that's such golden advice because otherwise you graduate from the 8A program and then you what? Like what do you have from that? Because you need to have other things in the pipeline. Don't just rely on one thing all the time. So that's so great. I have so much enjoyed this conversation. I really am interested to see what people are going to say about this. And if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
LinkedIn is the best way. I think it's Constance Jackson, and I think it says Acquisitions Me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very easy to find on LinkedIn and also on Instagram. I post government contracts, all sorts of information, and I'm at GovConsMe on Instagram.
I will make sure to link Constance's LinkedIn information in the show notes. And we want to hear from you. What do you think that the government does right? Do you agree? Do you disagree? We want to hear from you. So please email me at breakingthestandard@gmail.com and make sure to go connect with us on LinkedIn and go listen to us on Apple and Spotify. And until next time, bye.